How does a couple go from "I do" to "I hate you"? From standing at the altar to barely standing to be in the same room? Today, we're opening a door few dare to open. Not to blame, but to understand, because marriages don't die overnight. They erode, moment by moment. If you've ever asked yourself, what kills love? Stay. And this might explain everything. It all begins with a promise, a wedding day, a glance exchanged at the altar that says, "I can't imagine life without you." That's what most couples feel in the beginning. Hope, optimism, passion, and certainty. A certainty so strong, it blinds them to everything else. But beneath the vows and the flowers, something deeper and more dangerous is happening. Self-delusion. Romantic love is intoxicating. It doesn't just lift your spirits, it distorts your judgment. You become convinced you found the one. You see them through a lens that amplifies what you adore and conveniently ignores what might become difficult later. A man becomes a version of himself he believes will win her heart. More patient, more attentive, more affectionate than he's ever been. She too adjusts herself. More agreeable, more relaxed, less demanding. But here's the hard truth. Neither is showing their whole self. They're showing the self they think the other person wants. It's not manipulation, it's instinctual. Both participants are caught in the haze of romantic optimism, believing love alone will make everything work. In that phase, compromises feel effortless. You overlook annoyances. You interpret differences as charming quirks. But this isn't authenticity, it's a mutual performance. And that performance is exhausting. No one can maintain it forever. Yet when they stand there saying "I do," neither realizes that they're stepping into a contract built, in part, on false premises. They're not marrying the whole truth of the other person. They're marrying the idealized version they helped to create. That's why, as time passes, disappointments feel so profound. It's not just that your spouse is behaving differently, it's that the illusion you both willingly maintained is starting to crack. For many men, this realization comes quietly but sharply. The cool, easygoing woman they fell for now expresses strong opinions and emotions. The independence they admired now feels like emotional distance. The freedom they felt at first slowly became a structure of expectations. For many women, it feels just as disorienting. The attentive, romantic man she married seems to shift, pulling back, less engaged, more distracted. But here's the thing. Neither partner changed. They're simply reverting to their authentic selves. The selves they hid or softened to win the relationship. And because no one teaches us to prepare for this moment, when the honeymoon ends and the masks come off, we interpret the shift as betrayal. Who is this person? Why are they so different now? But they're not different. They're real. The romantic love drug wore off, and now the true marriage begins. That's why the phrase "I can't imagine life without you" so often becomes "I can't imagine being in this life with you." Because what most couples don't realize is this. Marriage itself isn't what kills love. It simply removes the illusions love created. And when that happens, when two people must face each other not as the polished, perfect partners they once appeared to be, but as real, flawed, complex human beings, that's when the hard work starts. Or, that's when many start to quietly drift apart. After the illusion fades, most men don't intend to sabotage their marriage, but they often do, quietly and gradually. It begins with what seems like kindness. He becomes too accommodating, the classic Mr. Nice Guy. At first glance, that seems like a virtue. Being agreeable, going along, avoiding conflict, but underneath that accommodation is a dangerous pattern. He's not setting boundaries. He's not being fully authentic. He's showing a version of himself designed to please, not to lead. And women can sense it. They know when a man is withholding his truth. They feel the absence of clear direction. And what feels like kindness quickly begins to feel like weakness. She doesn't want a best friend who nods politely at everything she says. She wants a partner who leads with confidence and clarity. When he abandons that role, even unconsciously, he hands her the leadership of the relationship. But that's not what she truly desires. Without realizing it, he's created an imbalance, and it unsettles both of them. Soon after, another shift happens. Having secured the marriage, he starts to relax emotionally. The man who once listened closely to her stories, asked questions about her day, noticed small things. gradually becomes inattentive. He assumes she's there for good. He's busy, distracted, checked out. He doesn't realize that the seemingly small act of tuning out, glazing over while she talks about her frustrations or joys, isn't harmless. It's the beginning of emotional distance. Women feel connected through conversation, through sharing even the trivial parts of their day. When that stops, when he stops listening, when he stops asking, she feels something deeper than neglect. She feels invisible. And the moment she stops telling him these little things, that's the warning sign he misses. It's not that she's running out of stories. It's that she's no longer trusting him to receive them. Add to this another quiet betrayal. He lets himself go. He stops taking care of his body. The man who once looked sharp, who took pride in his appearance, now wears exhaustion, indifference, extra weight. It may seem shallow to point this out, but for both men and women, attraction matters. A man who no longer cares for himself sends an unspoken message: I no longer care what you think of me. And finally, the most damaging behavior of all, he becomes defensive. When she criticizes him, however gently, he shuts down. He withdraws. Rather than engaging, listening, reflecting, he stonewalls. It's not that her criticism is easy to hear. It isn't. But his shutdown doesn't solve it. It escalates it. She becomes more frustrated. She pushes harder. He retreats further. This vicious cycle of avoidance, frustration, distance, becomes a slow death for intimacy. And the worst part? None of these betrayals are dramatic. They're not affairs. They're not abuse. They're small, almost imperceptible failures of attention, presence, and leadership. But they stack up. Over time, they form the foundation of resentment and eventually of emotional divorce. By the time most men realize this, they're often standing in the rubble of a marriage, wondering how things fell apart, without a single catastrophic event. But it didn't fall apart overnight. It eroded quietly, in all the moments he stopped leading, stopped listening, and stopped showing up fully as the man she once admired. It's easy to point fingers at what men do wrong, but marriage doesn't erode from one side alone. While men tend to withdraw, women often slip into patterns that feel equally destructive, but in a different way. It starts with criticism. For many women, criticism doesn't feel cruel. It feels helpful, even necessary. She believes she's guiding him, refining him, improving the relationship. But from his perspective, that guidance feels like an endless list of disappointments. Every comment about how he should drive differently, how he folds the laundry, wrong, how he forgot a small detail of her day. It all accumulates, and over time, it quietly erodes his sense of masculinity, not because he's fragile, but because constant criticism sends a simple but devastating message. You're not enough as you are. He stops feeling appreciated. He stops feeling admired. He starts questioning his worth. But it doesn't stop there. When her frustration builds and he pulls away, another pattern emerges: emotional manipulation. This isn't malicious. It's often unconscious. She might withhold affection when upset. She might cry as a way to influence him, rather than express authentic sadness. She might withdraw emotionally, creating distance until he comes chasing. These tactics may feel instinctive in the heat of conflict, but they carry an undertone of punishment, and the relationship becomes transactional. Affection turns into currency. Approval becomes conditional. But nothing damages intimacy faster than when sex itself becomes a weapon. When physical connection is used as leverage, do this or I'm withholding that, the relationship dynamic changes profoundly. For many men, sex is one of their deepest emotional connections. When it disappears or is used manipulatively, he doesn't just feel rejected physically. He feels disconnected emotionally. He may not know how to articulate it. He may not talk about it. But it cuts deeper than most women realize. Then comes one of the most subtle but corrosive behaviors: comparison. Comparing him to her father, to an ex-boyfriend, to a coworker, to a fictional ideal. It doesn't matter who. Every time a man hears, "Why can't you be more like him?" he hears a truth louder than any praise she's ever given: "You're not enough." And when a man feels emasculated like that, he doesn't rise to meet the challenge. He shuts down. He gives up. He emotionally checks out. Women often don't see this moment happening. They're trying to communicate dissatisfaction, but they're unknowingly striking at his core identity. And when respect fades, love soon follows. A man who no longer feels respected at home becomes a man who no longer feels at home even in his own house. This is how criticism and control quietly replace connection. Neither partner sees it happening in real time. It's death by 1,000 cuts on both sides. He withdraws to protect himself. She criticizes to protect the relationship. But both end up isolated, resentful, exhausted. By the time either of them notices how far they've drifted, they're no longer partners working toward a shared life. They're adversaries managing a fragile truce. Or worse, they're strangers occupying the same space, pretending nothing's wrong, until it all inevitably collapses. Part 4. The death spiral of resentment. Most marriages don't explode in a single moment. They erode. Year by year, the decline follows a predictable, almost tragic timeline. In the first 1 to 3 years, it still feels fresh. There's love, there's hope, there's politeness. But already, subtle cracks are forming. He starts to take her for granted. He listens less attentively. The thoughtful gestures that once felt natural, flowers, date nights, genuine compliments, start to fade. At the same time, she begins a quiet campaign of improvement. She suggests changes. She points out his flaws softly at first. Neither says much. They don't want to rock the boat. They tell themselves, it's just adjustment. Marriage is hard at the beginning, right? But beneath the surface, resentment is quietly building. From years 3 to 7, this resentment deepens. For him, it's the slow realization that nothing he does seems good enough anymore. The feeling of being nagged, of having to defend even small choices, starts to wear him down. For her, the emotional connection she craves begins to feel out of reach. His inattentiveness, his emotional withdrawal, feels like rejection. And so the cycle intensifies. Arguments start. First about small things. Where to go for dinner, who forgot the milk, how to load the dishwasher. But the arguments aren't about dishes or groceries. They're about disappointment, about unmet needs, about the growing distance neither knows how to bridge. By year 7 or 8, they're no longer pretending. Maybe they've stopped going to bed at the same time. Maybe they take separate vacations, telling friends and family, we just need our own space. Then 6. But deep down, they both know. They're drifting. By year 10, something else happens. He gives up trying. The man who once chased her affection now prioritizes escape. More hours at work, hobbies, distractions. She gives up respecting him. The woman who once admired his strength now questions every decision he makes, sometimes even openly mocking him. At best, they become roommates, coexisting politely, sharing chores and schedules but little else. At worst, they become adversaries. Every interaction charged with bitterness, every mistake magnified, every wound reopened. This is why divorce, when it finally comes, often feels so cruel. It's not just about splitting assets. It's about 10 years of unmet expectations, 10 years of growing silence, 10 years of looking at the person across the table and thinking, how did we get here? Infidelity often appears around this stage. But contrary to popular belief, affairs are rarely the cause of divorce. They're a symptom of years spent feeling unseen, unheard, unloved. For men, infidelity is often a search for respect, a longing to feel wanted again, even if briefly. For women, it's often a search for emotional connection, to feel desired, cherished, understood. Neither side enters marriage expecting to fail, but without tools to bridge their differences, without a shared language for emotional needs, they slowly revert to old patterns. Default settings. For him, independence, emotional distance, solitude. For her, emotional interconnection, sensitivity, a desire for closeness. These default collide. And when the romantic illusion wears off, they realize they never really understood each other. The tragedy isn't that they changed. The tragedy is that they never fully knew each other to begin with. And so they drift, until one or both can no longer pretend. This is the death spiral of resentment. Not sudden, but inevitable when ignored.